The stars had always been kind to humanity. For 200 years, they had traveled among them, trading stories and goods with alien species who found humans strange but fascinating. Earth was known across the galaxy as a world of poets, scientists, and dreamers. They built hospitals on distant moons. They shared music with species who had never heard a guitar. They were loved because they chose to be loving. Commander Jake stood on the observation deck of the diplomatic vessel Meridian, watching the blue and green marble of Haven's Rest spin slowly below. It was humanity's colony, home to 60 million people who had left Earth seeking adventure and peace. Children played in parks designed to look like old American suburbs. Families gathered for dinners under alien skies that had become home. Jake had served in space for 20 years. He had never fired a weapon in combat. There had never been a need. Humanity's small defense fleet existed mostly for show, a polite gesture to prove they took security seriously. The real protection came from treaties, from friendships, from the simple fact that humans were too useful and too kind to harm. His communicator buzzed. It was Dr. Dawson, the ship's and his closest friend. She was excited about a new cultural exchange program with a species known for their beautiful sculptures. She wanted to discuss the details over dinner. Jake smiled and agreed to meet her in an hour. He took one last look at Haven's Rest, thinking about how lucky humanity was to have found such peace among the stars. He never got to that dinner. The first explosion came without warning. A warship appeared from nowhere, its weapons already firing. Jake watched in frozen horror as beams of white light struck the planet's surface. Cities vanished in clouds of fire and dust. The sky over Haven's Rest turned orange, then red, then black. More ships arrived, dozens of them, then hundreds. They moved with terrible purpose, targeting population centers with surgical precision, schools, hospitals, residential districts. They were not trying to conquer, they were trying to erase. Jake screamed orders into his communicator, but there was nothing to be done. The Meridian was unarmed. It was a ship built for handshakes and conversations, not for war. He could only watch as 60 million people died in the span of 3 hours. They did not respond to hails. They did not issue demands. They simply killed until there was nothing left to kill, and then they moved on. Reports flooded in from across human space. New Geneva was burning. Arcadia Prime had gone silent. 3 colonies, 800 million people, wiped from existence in a single coordinated attack. They had planned this for years, waiting for the perfect moment to strike while humanity's tiny fleet was scattered across a dozen systems. Admiral Ben Carter, head of Earth's Defense Force, received the news in his office on Luna Base. He was 63 years old and had spent his career hoping he would never have to fight a real war. Now he sat surrounded by holographic displays showing the death toll climbing higher with every passing minute. His hands shook as he contacted the Galactic Concord, the coalition of 12 alien species that had promised to protect peace in the galaxy. Surely they would help. Surely they would not stand by while an innocent species was slaughtered. The Concord's response came 6 hours later. They expressed deep concern over the situation. They promised to investigate the matter thoroughly. They urged all parties to seek diplomatic solutions. They did nothing. On Earth, people gathered in the streets, staring at screens that showed images too horrible to comprehend. Parents wept for children who had moved to the colonies seeking better lives. Grandparents collapsed, learning that entire family lines had been erased in moments. The grief was so vast it had no name. Jake remained on the Meridian for 3 days, orbiting the graveyard that had been Haven's Rest. He could not leave. He could not look away. Below him, the planet's surface still glowed with dying fires. No rescue ships came because there was no one left to rescue. On the 3rd day, he received a transmission from New Geneva. It had been recorded in the final moments before the colony fell. A little girl, no more than 7 years old, looked into the camera with eyes full of confusion and fear. She asked a simple question that would haunt humanity forever. Why isn't anyone coming to help us? The transmission ended. Jake played it again and again and again. When the Meridian finally returned to Earth, Jake found a world transformed by sorrow. The flags flew at half-mast. The streets were quiet. People spoke in whispers as if loud voices might invite more tragedy. The United Earth Assembly gathered in Geneva, the great hall filled with representatives from every nation. They had come to decide how humanity would respond to the greatest crime in its history. Some called for peace talks. Others demanded answers from the conquered. A few simply wept, unable to form words. Then Governor Maria Santos rose to speak. She was 60 years old, a grandmother who had built her career on compromise and understanding. She had always believed that problems could be solved with patience and kindness. Her own granddaughter had lived on Arcadia Prime. The hall fell silent as she walked to the podium. She stood there for a long moment, looking at the faces of leaders who had spent their lives believing in peace. When she spoke, her voice was steady and cold. "We tried peace, we tried reason, we're done." She stepped down without another word. No one asked what she meant. Everyone already knew. That night, Earth began to change. Factories that had built toys and furniture received new orders. Universities that had studied art and philosophy shifted their focus. Military officers who had spent decades behind desks dusted off old manuals and began to read. Humanity had spent 2 centuries proving they could be kind. Now they would spend whatever time was necessary proving something else entirely. In orbit above Earth, Jake sat alone in his quarters, playing the little girl's message one more time. He made a promise to her ghost, to all 800 million ghosts, that their deaths would not go unanswered. The stars had been kind to humanity for 200 years. That kindness was over, and the galaxy was about to learn what happened when humans stopped being civilized. 6 months passed, and Earth went silent. No trade ships left its ports. No diplomatic messages answered the calls of worried allies. The planet wrapped itself in an energy shield that blocked all scans, all communications, all attempts to see what was happening below. To the rest of the galaxy, it appeared that humanity had simply given up and crawled into a hole to die. They celebrated their victory. High Commander Al, the architect of the massacre, received medals and praise from his government. He had done what many thought impossible. He had broken the humans without losing a single ship in return. The soft, peaceful species that had spread its influence too far and too fast was now nothing more than a memory and a warning. The Galactic Conquered moved on to other matters. Some members expressed quiet relief that the human problem had solved itself. Others felt shame but did nothing with that feeling. Life continued among the stars as if 800 million people had never existed. But beneath Earth's silent shield, something was stirring. General Cole had been retired for 15 years when the call came. He was 71 years old, living in a small cabin in Montana, trying to forget the wars he had studied but never fought. The message was simple. Earth needed him. He packed a bag and left within the hour. What he found when he reached Geneva shocked him. The world's governments had united under a single purpose. Every factory on 6 continents was being converted for weapons production. Every mine was operating around the clock. Every scientist who had ever studied physics or chemistry or biology had been recruited for a single project. They called it Project Prometheus, and its goal was simple. Humanity would build the most powerful military force the galaxy had ever seen, and they would do it in secret. General Cole took command of the newly formed United Earth Defense Command. He gathered officers from every nation, veterans of small conflicts and peacekeeping missions, who had never imagined fighting a real war. He looked at their faces and saw fear, anger, and determination in equal measure. "They called us soft," he told them on his first day. They called us weak because we chose kindness over cruelty. They mistook our restraint for inability. We will correct their error." Across the planet, the transformation accelerated. Car factories became tank factories. Shipping yards became places where warships took shape. Universities that had studied the stars for wonder now studied them for weakness, looking for every advantage that could be gained against them. Dr. Amy Reeves led a team of weapons scientists working deep beneath the Nevada desert. She had been a pacifist once, a woman who believed that violence solved nothing. Then she learned that her husband and 3 children had been among the dead on Arcadia Prime. She had not cried since that day. She had only worked. Her team studied everything humanity had ever created for war and everything they had chosen to abandon. Old weapons, forbidden weapons, weapons that the Galactic Conquered had banned centuries ago because they were too cruel, too destructive, too effective. Amy did not care about bans anymore. She cared about results. Her greatest creation was something the soldiers would later call spite rounds. These were bullets and missiles designed specifically to kill. Her team had studied their biology for months, learning every weakness, every pain receptor, every vulnerability. The weapons they created would not just kill. They would make dying take as long as possible. When she presented her work to General Cole, he studied the data for a long time. Then he approved full production without a word. In the mountains of Colorado, Lieutenant Torres trained the first generation of human shock troops. She was 26 years old, a survivor of Haven's Rest who had lived only because she had hidden among the bodies of her friends while soldiers walked past, laughing at the dead. She did not laugh anymore. She did not smile. She only trained, and she trained others to be just like her, soldiers who felt nothing but the cold need for justice, soldiers who would fight until they won or died trying. The training was brutal. Many failed. Many quit. Those who remained became something new, something humanity had not created in generations. They became warriors. 3 months into Project Prometheus, the Galactic Conquered sent envoys to check on Earth. Their ship arrived at the edge of the solar system and found something unexpected. A massive energy shield surrounded the entire planet, blocking all attempts to scan or communicate. Automated defense platforms floated in orbit, their weapons tracking the conquered ship with obvious threat. A single message played on repeat, transmitted in every known language. "Humanity is busy, do not disturb." The envoys tried to hail Earth directly. No response. They tried to penetrate the shield with long-range sensors. Nothing worked. After 3 days of waiting, they returned to conquered space with a troubling report. Something was happening on Earth, something big, but no one knew what. High Commander Al received the report and dismissed it. The humans were probably building monuments to their dead, he thought. Perhaps writing sad poetry about their lost colonies. That was what soft species did when they suffered. They cried and remembered and eventually faded away. He could not have been more wrong. Beneath the Rocky Mountains, in a cavern that had not existed 1 year ago, Lieutenant Torres stood on a platform overlooking humanity's greatest secret. Before her stretched rows of warships, 10,000 of them, gleaming under artificial lights. Fighters and bombers and carriers and destroyers, all built in secret, all waiting for the day they would be unleashed. Engineers worked around the clock, finishing the last details. Pilots trained in simulators that prepared them for combat against tactics. Soldiers checked their weapons and armor, counting the days until they could use them. Looked at the fleet and thought about her friends who had died on Haven's Rest. She thought about the little girl whose message had been played at every military briefing since the massacre. She thought about the 800 million souls crying out for justice. "They have no idea what they woke up," she whispered. Above her, Earth continued its silence. The shield held, the factories worked, the scientists invented, the soldiers trained. And somewhere in space, High Commander Al slept peacefully, dreaming of the glory he had won by killing the innocent. He did not know that his nightmares were just beginning. Humanity had been kind for 200 years because they chose to be. Now they were choosing something different. And when the shield finally fell and the fleet finally flew, the galaxy would learn a terrible truth. The wolves had only been sleeping. Now they were awake, and they were hungry. 1 year after the massacre, the silence ended. It began with a transmission. Every communication device in space received the same message at the same moment. There were no words, no threats, no demands. Just coordinates pointing to a remote system called Reach, and a time stamp for exactly 24 hours in the future. High Commander Al studied the message with amusement. The humans had finally found their courage, he thought. They wanted to make some pathetic show of defiance before accepting their place as a broken species. He would grant them this small dignity before crushing whatever pitiful force they had managed to build. He dispatched a fleet of 200 warships to the coordinates. It was far more than necessary, he knew. The humans had never been warriors. They had no military tradition, no combat experience, no killer instinct. This would be less a battle and more an execution. Captain Shaw stood on the bridge of the assault carrier No Mercy Given, watching the fleet emerge from faster-than-light travel. His ship was one of 3,000 that had been waiting in the darkness for hours, running silent, invisible to sensors. Around him, the human armada stretched across the void like a wall of steel and fury. He studied the formation through his tactical display. 200 ships. They had sent 200 ships against 3,000. The arrogance was almost impressive. "Open a channel," he said calmly. "Let them see us." The human fleet lit up like a constellation being born. 3,000 warships powered their engines simultaneously, their running lights blazing against the black of space. The sight was designed for psychological impact, and it worked. Communications erupted with confused and terrified chatter. Captain Shaw leaned toward his microphone. His voice was broadcast across every frequency, reaching every ship, every world, every ear that would listen. "You killed our children, you burned our homes, you laughed while they screamed. Now we're coming, not for territory, not for resources, for you. Every single one of you who gave the orders, every single one of you who pulled the trigger, every single one of you who watched and did nothing. We're coming and we're not going to stop until justice is done." The commander ordered a retreat. It was too late. The Battle of Reach lasted 4 hours. The human fleet moved with a coordination that stunned military analysts across the galaxy. They did not fight like amateurs learning warfare for the first time. They fought like predators who had been hunting for 1,000,000 years. Weapons that had never been seen before tore through shields like they were paper. Fighters swarmed enemy ships with suicidal aggression, sacrificing themselves to create openings for the larger vessels. The spite rounds that Dr. Reeves had designed did exactly what they were meant to do, and the screams of dying filled the communication channels. When it was over, not a single ship remained. Not a single escape pod was allowed to flee. The humans took no prisoners. Captain Shaw surveyed the wreckage drifting through space. He felt nothing. No triumph, no satisfaction, only the cold certainty that this was just the beginning. The Galactic Concord convened an emergency session within hours of the battle. Representatives from 12 species gathered in their great hall, demanding answers. How had humanity built such a fleet? How had they developed such weapons? How had a peaceful species become capable of such devastating violence? The human response came not from Earth, but from a small ship that appeared unannounced in conquered space. Ambassador walked into the great hall within her hand and steel in her eyes. "You want to know what happened," she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the chamber. "I'll tell you what happened. You let them kill us. You knew the attack was coming and you said nothing. We have the communications. We have the evidence. 3 of your member species received warnings from their intelligence services, and they chose to stay silent." The hall erupted in protests and denials. Ambassador waited for the noise to fade. You could have saved 800 million lives with a single message. You didn't. So don't stand there now and demand that we show restraint. You have no moral authority here. You have nothing we want or need. Stay out of our way. She turned and walked out. No one tried to stop her. On the border worlds, panic spread like wildfire. The humans were coming, and there was no force that could stop them. Military leaders who had laughed at the massacre now begged for reinforcements that did not exist. Politicians who had approved the attack began quietly arranging escape routes to neutral territory. Sergeant Vance led the first human ground forces onto soil. Her unit was called the Reapers, 500 soldiers who had volunteered for the most dangerous missions. They dropped from orbit in armored pods, landing in the heart of a military installation that had served as a staging ground for the massacre. What followed was not a battle, it was a lesson. The Reapers moved through the base with terrifying efficiency. They killed every soldier who raised a weapon. They captured every officer who surrendered. They did not touch the civilian workers who cowered in corners, too afraid to move. When the base was secured, Sergeant Vance stood before the captured officers and read from a list. Names, ranks, specific crimes. Every officer who had participated in the massacre had been identified through captured databases and intelligence intercepts. Those on the list were taken away. Those not on the list were released with a message. Tell your people, we are not here for conquest. We are here for justice. Those who killed the innocent will answer for what they did. Everyone else will be left alone. This is your one warning. Word spread across space. The humans were not mindless destroyers. They were something far more frightening. They were precise. They were unstoppable, and they were keeping score. High Commander Al received hourly reports of human advances. 17 fronts, 17 simultaneous attacks, everyone successful. His grand fleet was being torn apart piece by piece, and there was nothing he could do. His aide asked what orders he wanted to give. Al stared at the map showing human forces closing in from every direction. He had planned the massacre for years, believing that destroying the colonies would break humanity's spirit forever. He had been so certain of his victory. Now he understood his mistake. He had not destroyed humanity's spirit. He had awakened something that had been sleeping inside them for centuries, something old and dark and terrible, something that would not rest until it had taken everything from him. He had no orders to give. He had no strategy that could save them. All he could do was wait for the wolves to arrive at his door. And they were getting closer every day. 18 months after the massacre, the Dominion was dying. Their great fleet had been reduced to scattered remnants hiding in asteroid fields and nebulae. Their proud military academy stood empty, their students dead or captured. Their leaders, the ones who had planned and celebrated the slaughter of 800 million innocents, were being hunted down one by one with a patience that bordered on obsession. Admiral Laura Martinez commanded the human expeditionary fleet from the bridge of the carrier Absolute Resolve. She was 54 years old, a former logistics officer who had never expected to lead ships into battle. The war had changed many things. It had changed her most of all. Every morning she reviewed the list. The names of every officer who had participated in the massacre, compiled from captured records and intelligence intercepts. Each name had a status next to it. Most said eliminated or captured. Some still said at large. Those were the ones she dreamed about. Her daughter had been a teacher on New Geneva. She had been 28 years old, newly married, expecting her first child. She had sent a message to her mother the morning of the attack, excited about feeling the baby kick for the first time. 3 hours later, she was dust. Admiral Martinez did not speak about her daughter. She did not need to. Everyone in the fleet knew why she drove them so hard, why she accepted no excuses, why she showed no mercy to those who had shown none themselves. But the war was taking its toll on more than just the enemy. Corporal Bishop crouched behind a wall on the colony world of Prime, trying to calm his breathing. He was 23 years old, barely old enough to remember a time when humanity had been peaceful. He had joined the military because he believed in justice. Now he was not sure what he believed anymore. His unit had been hunting a commander named, one of the officers who had personally ordered the bombardment of civilian shelters on Arcadia Prime. They had tracked him to this settlement, a small mining town far from the main cities. The operation should have been simple: find the target, eliminate the target, move on. Instead, found himself staring at a terrified soldier who had dropped his weapon and fallen to his knees. The alien's translator crackled with desperate words. "Please, I was just following orders. I didn't know what they were planning. I have a family, please." His finger rested on the trigger. He had heard these excuses before. Everyone was just following orders. Everyone claimed innocence. Everyone begged for the mercy they had to human children. But something in the alien's eyes gave him pause. Fear. Not the fear of a guilty conscience, but the fear of a being who genuinely did not understand why death had come for him. Lowered his weapon. "Get out of here," he said. "Go back to your family. Tell your leaders that we're not like them. We don't kill the innocent, but the guilty. The ones who gave the orders, they will answer for everything." The soldier fled into the darkness, watched him go, wondering if he had just made a mistake. Then he turned and continued the hunt for. They found the commander hiding in a basement beneath the town's administrative building. He had disguised himself as a civilian, but the facial recognition software in their helmets identified him instantly. He did not beg. He did not apologize. He simply stared at them with cold hatred until they led him away in restraints. Another name crossed off the list. Another small piece of justice delivered. It never felt like enough. The Galactic Concord made one final attempt to stop the war. They convened a special session and summoned humanity to explain itself. Ambassador arrived alone, dressed in simple black clothes that had become the unofficial uniform of humanity during the conflict. The Concord's chairman, a being from a species known for their diplomatic skills, addressed her with carefully chosen words. "This has gone on long enough. They have been punished. Their military is destroyed. Their empire is collapsing. Surely humanity's thirst for vengeance has been satisfied. We call upon you to cease hostilities immediately and allow the healing process to begin." Ambassador stood silent for a long moment. Then she activated her and began to read. Names, human names, the names of children who had died in the massacre. She read each one slowly, clearly, giving every name the weight it deserved. Maria Santos, age 7, New Geneva. Tommy, age 4, Arcadia Prime. Lily Graham, age 9, Haven's Rest. The reading took 3 hours. Some Concord members left during the recitation, unable to bear the weight of it. Others stayed, their expressions shifting from impatience to discomfort to something that might have been shame. When she finished, Ambassador looked up from her. "You ask us to show restraint. Where was your restraint when our people screamed? Where was your justice when 800 million voices cried out for help? You have none to offer, so we will take our own. When every person responsible for these deaths has answered for their crimes, the war will end. Not before." She walked out without waiting for a response. Admiral Martinez pushed her fleet deeper into space. The enemy lay ahead, undefended. The last of their warships had been destroyed in a final, desperate battle 3 days ago. There was nothing between humanity and the world where the massacre had been planned. Her officers waited for orders. The planet below held 3 billion civilians, most of whom had nothing to do with the attack on humanity. But the planet also held the government buildings where the massacre had been authorized, the military headquarters where officers had celebrated the deaths of children, the homes of leaders who had laughed at human grief. Admiral Martinez stared at the tactical display showing the planet's population centers. One command would glass the surface. One command would end 3 billion lives and erase the species from existence. It would be justice on a scale the galaxy had never seen. Or would it be something else? Would it make humanity into the very monsters they had sworn to destroy? Her daughter's face flashed through her mind. The last message, the excitement about the baby, the life that should have been. Her hand moved toward the command console, then it stopped. She thought about Corporal Bishop's report, about the soldier who had been spared because he was not on the list. She thought about the civilians who had sheltered human prisoners during the war, risking their lives to protect people their government called enemies. She thought about the weight of 3 billion souls and the kind of species humanity would become if it carried that weight. The bridge was silent. Everyone watched. Everyone waited. Admiral Martinez closed her eyes. When she opened them, her voice was steady. Open a channel to the government. Tell them we are prepared to accept their surrender. Tell them every person responsible for the massacre will be tried and punished. Tell them their civilian population will not be harmed. Her executive officer looked surprised. Admiral, are you sure, after everything they did? She turned to face him, and in her eyes he saw something he had not expected. Not mercy, not weakness, something else entirely. We came here for justice, not revenge. There's a difference. She paused. And if we can't remember that difference, then they won. Below them, the waited, and humanity made its choice. 2 years after the massacre, the war ended. It did not end with fire and extinction, as so many had expected. It ended with trials, with evidence, with justice delivered one name at a time, in courtrooms filled with translators and witnesses, and the weight of 800 million dead demanding answers. The tribunals lasted 6 months. Every commander who had participated in the massacre was brought before judges from a dozen species. Evidence was presented. Testimonies were heard. The guilty were given the chance to speak in their own defense, a courtesy they had never offered to the humans they had killed. In the end, 2,847 individuals were convicted, officers who had given orders, politicians who had authorized the attack, soldiers who had personally executed civilians. Each one was sentenced to death, and each sentence was carried out with clinical efficiency. High Commander Al was the last to face judgment. He stood before the tribunal with his head held high, refusing to show fear even at the end. When asked if he had any final words, he spoke with cold defiance. I would do it again. Your species was a disease spreading across the galaxy. We tried to cure that disease. We failed, but someone else will succeed. The human judge looked at him for a long moment before responding. You're wrong. You didn't fail because of our weapons or our tactics. You failed because you didn't understand what you were fighting. We were never weak. We simply chose to be kind. You made us choose differently, and now you've seen what happens when humanity stops being kind. Al was executed the following morning. His name was crossed off the list. When the last trial ended, humanity kept its word. The civilian population was left unharmed. Aid ships arrived carrying food, medicine, and construction materials. The same species that had built weapons of terrible destruction now built hospitals and schools on enemy soil. The galaxy watched in stunned confusion. This was not how wars ended. This was not how victors behaved. Every empire in history had taken land, taken resources, taken revenge beyond what justice demanded. Humanity took only the guilty and gave back mercy. President Daniel addressed the Galactic conquered 6 months after the war's end. He was a quiet man, a former professor who had risen to leadership not through ambition, but through the simple fact that someone had to do the job. He spoke without notes, his words simple and direct. You've spent 2 years wondering what kind of species we are. You watched us wage war with fury you never thought possible. You watched us build weapons that terrified even our allies. And now you watch us rebuild the worlds of our enemies, and you don't understand. Let me help you understand. We are not cruel. We are not bloodthirsty. We are not the monsters you feared we might become. We are simply human, and being human means we contain multitudes. We can love our children with every fiber of our being. We can also fight to the last breath to protect them. We can show mercy to the innocent. We can also show no mercy at all to those who harm them. We can build civilizations of beauty and wonder. We can also tear down civilizations that threaten everything we love. You thought you understood us. You saw our kindness and called it weakness. You saw our restraint and assumed we were prey. Now you know the truth. We are kind because we choose to be. We are merciful because we are strong enough to afford mercy. But cross that line again, and you will not face the humanity that seeks peace. You will face the humanity that ends wars. We hope you never make that mistake again. We really do. Because we didn't enjoy this war. We didn't celebrate the blood we spilled. We did what we had to do, and now we're going to spend a very long time trying to heal the wounds it left. But make no mistake, if we have to, we'll do it again, and next time we won't be starting from scratch. He stepped down from the podium and walked out. No one spoke for several minutes. Commander Jake returned to Earth on a transport ship crowded with soldiers going home. He was older now, his hair gray at the temples, his eyes carrying shadows that would never fully fade. He had started the war as a diplomat who had never fired a weapon. He ended it as a combat veteran with a medal for valor and memories he would spend a lifetime trying to forget. The transport landed outside New Geneva, or what New Geneva would someday become. The ruins had been cleared. New foundations were being laid. In another decade, another city would rise on this soil, filled with families who would only know the massacre from history books. Jake walked alone to the memorial garden that had been planted where the old city center once stood. 800 million names were carved into walls of black granite, arranged by colony and then by family, so the dead could rest together even in memory. He found his way to a section near the center, a small section, 7 names from a family he had known, parents, children, grandparents, an entire bloodline erased in a single afternoon. He stood there for a long time, unsure what to say, unsure if words meant anything anymore. Was it worth it? He turned to find Dr. Dawson walking toward him. She looked older too, her face lined with exhaustion and grief. She had spent the war treating wounded soldiers and civilians alike, unable to distinguish between pain regardless of what species felt it. I don't know, Jake admitted. I've been asking myself that question every day for 2 years. I still don't have an answer. Stood beside him, looking at the names on the wall. We proved something, at least. We proved we could fight back. We proved we could win. Maybe that matters. Maybe. Jake reached out and touched one of the names. A child, 6 years old. He had never met her, but he had carried her memory through every battle, every decision, every dark moment when he wondered if humanity had lost itself. Or maybe we just proved that we're capable of the same violence as everyone else. No, shook her head. We proved something more than that. We proved that we can be violent and still choose mercy. We can wage war and still know when to stop. That's not the same as being like everyone else. That's different. That's harder. Jake considered her words. He thought about Admiral Martinez, holding back the order that would have glassed an entire planet. He thought about Corporal Bishop, sparing a soldier who was just following orders. He thought about the tribunals, the careful separation of guilt from innocence, the determination to punish only those who deserved punishment. Maybe that was the answer. Not whether the war was worth it, but whether humanity had survived it with its soul intact. He thought they had, he hoped they had. A conquered diplomatic ship arrived at Earth 3 weeks later, carrying representatives who wanted to rebuild relations with humanity. Their ambassador, A being named who had argued against intervention during the massacre, asked to speak with someone who could explain what humanity truly was. They sent Commander. The meeting took place in a garden overlooking what had once been Geneva's skyline. The alien studied Jake with curiosity and something that might have been fear. "My government wants to know if we are safe," said. "They want to know if humanity will return to the species it was before the war, or if this new version of your species is what we should expect from now on." Jake thought about the question for a long time before answering. "We're both. We've always been both. We just didn't have a reason to show you the other side before. And now that we've seen it, should we be afraid?" Jake looked out at the city, at the construction crews building homes, at the children playing in parks that had been graveyards 2 years ago. He thought about everything humanity had done, everything they had suffered, everything they had chosen to become, and then chosen to step back from. "Only if you give us a reason to be." The alien nodded slowly, processing this answer. "Then we will make certain never to give you that reason." Jake smiled for the first time in months. It was a small smile, tired and sad but real. "That's all we ask. Be kind to each other. Don't hurt the innocent. Don't mistake mercy for weakness. Follow those rules and you'll never have to see what we can become." He paused. "Break those rules, and you won't see it coming until it's too late." The alien left. Jake remained in the garden until sunset, watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. Humanity had returned to the stars. They were different now in ways that would take generations to heal, but they had proven something important. They had proven that they could fight without becoming monsters. They could wage war without losing themselves. They could walk to the edge of the abyss and choose to step back. The galaxy would never forget what humanity was capable of. That was probably good. Fear could be a teacher, and some lessons needed to stick. But the galaxy would also remember something else. They would remember that humanity had won and then chosen mercy. They would remember the hospitals built on enemy soil, the aid given to former enemies, the justice delivered instead of revenge. And maybe, in time, they would understand the truth that humanity had learned in blood and fire. Kindness was not weakness. Mercy was not surrender. And the species that could do both, that could love and fight and choose when to stop, that species was the most dangerous thing in the universe. Not because of what they could destroy, but because of what they could become.